And our guest today is Matt Barber, attorney Matt Barber, who is the Vice President of Liberty Counsel Action. Let me tell everybody, the conference that you're talking about that you went to is on Wednesday, August 17th in Baltimore, Maryland, and it was called Pedophilia, Minor Attracted Persons, and the DSM Issues and Controversies, to which anybody, excuse me, in the right mind will go, duh, hello. There are some issues and controversies. It's just insane. It's just insane.
Yeah, well, yeah, they're whining about being vilified in our culture, you know, and that's what happens when you embrace the Keynesian worldview, or the worldview of the so-called progressive. It's a worldview that says that morality is relative. There are no clear lines of demarcation between what is right and what is wrong. The only thing immoral is to say that there's even anything immoral. Now, that's the one thing you can't do. That's immoral, to say that there are absolutes, that there is right and wrong. Why, what your truth may not be my truth, and what is true is different for every individual. And so, you know, embrace who you are, and you get to define the universe. And, well, this is just rebellion against God. This is, you know, the Judeo-Christian worldview says there is a God that we are all accountable to. He has written his law in the hearts of every man, woman, and child, versus this postmodern, secular humanist worldview, the moral relativist worldview, that says, no, guess what? We are God. We're not accountable to anybody. And it's to the degree where people are actually even rationalizing, making excuses for perverts, saying, hey, if I happen to want to have sex with kids, guess what? Kids have a right to define their sexuality and have a right to have sex with an adult. That is the logical outgrowth of this sexual anarchy movement in Alfred Kinsey's, frankly, demonic and fraudulent research.
Let me ask you this, because I'm very curious. You're an attorney, and the name of this organization is Before You Act. Before You Act. So these perverts obviously know that they are on the cusp of breaking a law, right? Was any of that addressed at this conference? Because, it kind of makes you wonder.
Yeah, I specifically asked, I said, okay, I keep hearing this term prepubescent thrown around. I keep hearing people say that children are not inherently unable to consent to having sex with an adult, and of course that's riddled with double negatives. And my dad always said, don't use no double negatives, but they were using them there. But basically saying kids should be able to consent to sex with an adult. I said, what's the consensus? What is an appropriate age of consent? Well, I got yelled down at that point because they knew, that's what Barber's here to get us to say that there. Well, one of the attendees there who was involved in the conference at some level, he couldn't help himself. He said this, quote, Anglo-American standard on age of consent is new and puritanical. In Europe, it was always set at 10 or 12. Ages of consent beyond that are relatively new and very strange, especially for boys. They've always been able to have sex at any age. That was his exact quote. Nobody disagreed. I mean, that was kind of like, so I got the feeling that they're incrementally looking to, ultimately, the pedophile movement even says infants can consent to sex just with a look in their eye. But so I got the feeling that, hey, 10 or 12, no problem.
Very interesting. The other thing that's interesting is on their news page on September 9th, they have issued a statement for World Suicide Prevention Day. And it's, oh my gosh. I don't even have to read the article to know.
Well, hey, listen, they come out with the same old, tired homosexual activist talking point that a Christian worldview that embraces Christian traditional morality and God's design for human sexuality is between a man and a woman. They call that hate and being anti-gay. That creates an environment that makes kids commit suicide. So the Christian worldview and Christians, people who believe in God, the biblical design for sexuality, we are causing kids to kill themselves. Well, the pedophile groups. This guy over there at Before You Act couldn't help himself. He went and attacked Dr. Reisman and myself, but said we were spreading misinformation. Did not address a single point of fact. Didn't issue a single example of how we were spreading misinformation. But then went on to use this tired old Trump card that the homosexual activists use, saying that we're responsible for these kids killing themselves because we don't embrace their disordered sexual behaviors. And so the pedophiles are saying the same thing. We cause pedophiles to kill themselves because the society stigmatizes, adults raping children.
Yeah, you know what it reminds me of? I went to it was a CESCAL conference, a CESCAL, which was a conference put on by the gay counseling community to educate kindergarten, elementary, junior high, and high school counselors to make their schools homosexual, gay friendly. And one of the things that I went to a workshop there, and it was led by a psychologist, and one of the things that she said in the workshop was, we always tell parents that have a gay child that there's only two choices. Either they have a gay child and they get over it and accept it, or their gay child is going to commit suicide. I mean, there was no other option at this conference. Yeah,
using fear propaganda, another indoctrination mill, where they refuse to acknowledge the reality that unknown thousands of people have found freedom from the bondage, and perhaps that's a poor choice of words, of the homosexual lifestyle, have found freedom, many of them through the power, the redeeming power of Jesus Christ, yet they somehow want to pretend, hey, ignore that former homosexual over there in the corner. He doesn't really exist. It really boggles the mind that they are so vested in this delusion that they are defined by their sexual behaviors. They're so invested in that they have to ignore even the obvious reality that, guess what? Sorry, ex-gays exist.
Right. Let me read part of this thing because I just noticed your name's in here. Have you seen this?
Yes, I saw. I was on Mr. Kramer.
Okay.
Made sure that I was copied on his email when it went out.
Oh, really?
I actually responded to it on the same email. But
I'll go ahead and read it for our audience. I'll just read this one paragraph. It says, but over the past 3 weeks, the symposium has been attacked by a small group of writers opposed to sexuality research and gay rights. One of them is Judith Reisman, who over the past 3 decades has become well known for her wild, reckless, and unsubstantiated accusations against the gay movement and the entire field of sexuality research. Her like-minded colleague, Matthew Barber, recently drew public criticism for blaming suicide among gay youth on the youth themselves. Both are now using...
Which is a lie, by the way, a blatant lie.
But. Right, this is here. Both are now using distortions and fabrications to mischaracterize the purpose of Before You Act and its symposium. They hide the fact that most symposium attendees advocated compassion for minor attracted people while rejecting adult minor sexual interaction. Reisman and Barber's misinformation...
Notice that qualifying term.
Yeah.
Most of them were opposed to adults having sex with children, which is absolute baloney. But the fact that he had to say most.
Well,
anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It says Reisman and Barber's misinformation is being propagated uncritically by writers and bloggers sympathetic to their ideology. I read that and I go, you got to be kidding. But then another question comes to my mind, and I'll make this the last question. I'm curious, did they throw out, because on their website I noticed that they mentioned the percentage of pedophiles that really exist, and we all know one, kind of like the whole 10% myth that Kinsey put out. Did they give an actual percentage of, say, there's 15% of pedophiles? Or? Yeah,
no, I actually heard that the 7 to 8% thrown around a couple times.
That's insane.
So, yeah. So, and hey, there are a lot of perverts out there in the world. There's no doubt about it.
But they're saying they're born that way, though, right?
Well, of course they're born. Oh, absolutely. Okay. They have all the same talking points as the homosexual activists. And in fact, the primary, I don't know that there was a single female pedophile there. The entire focus was on homosexual pedophilia, which is, very common, or pederasty, or minor attracted personhood, I guess it is. But so they threw out there, they rely heavily on Kinsey's fraudulent research. Kinsey himself facilitated the sexual assault of thousands of children during his, quote, research. He put stopwatches and ledgers in the hands of minor attracted people so that they could rape children and record what happened. And his finding was that why it's actually good for kids. Most of the kids find it as a pleasant experience. That's one of the, again, the talking points. And Harry Hay, the founding father of the gay rights movement, said that kids as young as 12, 13, 14, the best thing that could happen to them is to have a sexual relationship with a grown-up man.
Well, is there anything, our listeners, now that we've got them all educated and mad, is there anything that we can do?
Listen, I encourage people to stand up against this sexual anarchy movement in general. Don't let them intimidate you into silence. Don't stand for truth, for God's truth, for biological truth, for the truth of science on these issues, and push back. Don't be afraid to be called a homophobe or a pedophobe. Don't be afraid to be called, anti-abortion. Don't be afraid to be called a prude because you teach your children to wait until marriage, until they have sexual relations. Stand firm for God's truth, and God will bless you. Do it publicly, do it privately, do it in your schools, do it in your churches, do it in your places of business, and God will bless that.
That's right. Well, you know what? I'm glad that you and Judith went to this event. I would have loved to have gone. I would have asked so many questions as a therapist. I would have said, "Hey, and what about?" And they probably would have picked me up and threw me out the door because
we kept quiet for most of it, and then toward the end, I started asking some probing questions, and was taken aback at some of the answers I got. But somebody had to be there to do it to actually get the word out, and so I hope people can learn from this.
Yeah, that's right. Well, love you, buddy.